The stars had never felt so distant. Once, they had been symbols of hope, of exploration, of a future where humanity reached beyond its own fragile world. Now, they were grave markers, silent witnesses to the long, brutal war that had nearly wiped Earth from existence. The invaders had come without warning, tearing through the solar system with technology that dwarfed anything humanity had ever imagined. The first battles weren't battles at all. They were exterminations. Cities were turned to ash. Fleets were crushed before they could even mount a proper defense. The invaders weren't just conquering. They were erasing. And then, just as quickly as they arrived, they left. Not because humanity had won, not because Earth had fought them off, but because they thought the war was over. They thought we were already dead. For years, the silence that followed was worse than the war itself. The survivors, scattered, broken, hiding in the ruins, knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy returned. Earth wasn't destroyed, not completely. The invaders had simply moved on, leaving nothing but a hollow world in their wake. But deep beneath the surface, in the hidden bunkers and forgotten corners of the system, something had survived. Not just life, not just people, but something the invaders had never considered. Hate. The remnants of the human race had spent years preparing, gathering whatever scraps of technology they could find. The last surviving warships, old and battered, had been rebuilt in secret. New weapons, cobbled together from stolen alien tech, had been tested in the darkness. The survivors didn't just want to hide. They wanted revenge. And now, the time had come. The fleet, if it could still be called that, wasn't grand. It wasn't powerful. It wasn't the kind of force that should have stood a chance against the enemy that had once brought Earth to its knees. But it was all they had. And every single person aboard those ships knew one thing. This was it. There would be no second attempt. No fallback plan. No retreat. The last fleet had only one mission to strike before the enemy realized their mistake. Before they returned to finish what they started. And as the ships powered up, engines roaring to life for the first time in years, a single message was broadcast across the hidden network of survivors. A message that spread like wildfire, reaching every last soul who still dared to fight. We were never dead. And we are not done. But as the fleet began its silent march toward the enemy's domain, no one aboard knew the truth. They weren't the only ones who had been waiting. And the enemy was already watching. The fleet moved in silence, slipping past the shattered remains of Earth's old defense stations. The wreckage of war still hung in orbit, massive chunks of steel drifting aimlessly, reminders of just how badly humanity had lost the first time. Some of the younger pilots had never seen it before, not up close. They had grown up in bunkers, deep underground, hearing only stories of what had come before. But the veterans knew. They had fought here. They had watched the skies burn. And now, they were heading straight back into the fire. The lead ship, an aging war cruiser barely holding itself together, carried the remnants of Earth's command. A handful of officers, engineers, and soldiers who had somehow survived long enough to see this moment. No ranks mattered anymore. No uniforms, no governments. That had all died with the old world. Now, there were only those willing to fight, and those who had already given up. Inside the command deck, the air was tense. The glow of outdated control panels cast long shadows as quiet voices moved through the dimly lit room. Everyone was watching the scanners, waiting for the inevitable. The moment when the enemy would notice them. When their return would no longer be a secret. "This is a mistake," someone muttered. "We should have waited longer. Gathered more ships." "We don't have time," another voice shot back. "They'll be back any day now. If we wait, we die in hiding." That was the truth none of them wanted to admit. They weren't launching this attack because they were ready. They were launching it because they had no other choice. Out beyond the fleet, past the ruined satellites and dead stations, the cold emptiness of space stretched ahead. Somewhere in that darkness, the enemy lurked. Their ships, their outposts, their war machines. The ones who had burned Earth and then left it to rot. The ones who thought humanity wasn't worth finishing off. No one knew if the invaders had left a presence behind. No patrols had been seen in years. No signals had been intercepted. It was as if they had erased Earth from their concerns entirely. That, more than anything, was what made this mission possible. The enemy had underestimated them. Or at least, that was what they hoped. The fleet continued its slow advance, engines running at minimal power to avoid detection. Every ship in the formation was a relic, some barely functioning, patched together with stolen alien parts, held together with desperation and whatever scraps could be salvaged from old battlegrounds. But they weren't just machines. They were the last of Earth's warships, and every single one of them carried people who had nothing left to lose. Inside one of the fighter bays, a group of pilots sat in uneasy silence. Some adjusted their gear, running through system checks for the 100th time. Others simply sat with their eyes closed, lost in thought. This would be their first time facing the enemy in open combat. Most of them had never even seen an alien in real life. "They won't even know what hit them," one of the pilots said, trying to force a smirk. A grizzled veteran sitting nearby glanced up. His face was lined with old scars, his eyes hollow. "They will," he said quietly. "And when they do, they won't make the same mistake twice." No one had an answer to that. On the bridge of the lead cruiser, tension thickened as they neared the edge of the solar system. The scanners remained empty, but that didn't bring comfort. It only made the silence feel heavier. There should have been something: an automated sentry, a listening post, a drone. But there was nothing. That was when the first warning light flickered to life. Picking up something, a technician said, voice tight. "Faint, but it's there." The room fell silent. "Location?" the commander asked. "Unknown. It's not on any of our usual frequencies. Could be background radiation, but—" The technician trailed off, fingers moving over the console. "It's pulsing. A pattern. A signal." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy looks. If there was a signal, someone had left it here. That meant someone or something was watching. "Can we trace it?" The technician hesitated, not without alerting whoever's sending it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, the commander exhaled slowly. "Keep moving," he said. "And don't answer it." The fleet pressed forward, engines humming softly in the void. But now, every person on every ship felt the same unease creeping into their bones. Someone was out there. And they already knew humanity had returned. The signal kept pulsing. A quiet, rhythmic beat in the void. It wasn't strong, but it was steady, too deliberate to be background noise, too structured to be random interference. Every few seconds, it repeated, as if whispering a warning only the fleet could hear. No one spoke, but everyone felt the same creeping unease. If the enemy was still out there, they weren't hiding anymore. On the bridge of the lead ship, tension thickened. The crew worked in silence, their hands moving over outdated controls, their eyes flicking to the scanners again and again. The signal wasn't getting stronger, but it wasn't fading either. It was waiting. A decision had to be made. Keep moving forward and risk being seen, or turn back and abandon the only chance they had. "Still no visual confirmation?" someone asked. "Nothing. But if they wanted to stay hidden, they wouldn't use a signal this obvious." The commander stood near the main display, watching as the fleet edged closer to the source. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers curled slightly at his sides. He had been here before, right before Earth fell, when the enemy had used deception just like this to lure them into a trap. He wasn't about to make the same mistake. "Redirect course," he ordered. "Take us just outside its range." The pilots hesitated, then adjusted their controls. The fleet shifted, its path curving just beyond the source of the signal. If someone was watching, they would see the movement. But if it was a trap, they wouldn't be walking straight into it. Minutes passed in silence. The signal pulsed again. Then, without warning, it stopped. The sudden absence of the sound was almost worse than its presence. For the first time since detecting it, the room felt colder, like something unseen had just turned its attention fully toward them. "Why did it stop?" someone whispered. The answer came too fast. The scanners flared to life. A dozen new contacts. Then 2 dozen. Then more. They weren't just picking up signals anymore. They were picking up movement. Something had woken up. The fleet braced as alarms rippled through the ships. The static of long-dead communication channels crackled back to life, filled with distorted whispers and incomprehensible signals. The bridge crew scrambled to make sense of it, but no one could translate the voices. One thing was clear. The enemy had never truly left. They had just been waiting. Beyond the fleet, the darkness shifted. Shapes emerged from the black, moving fast, too fast. The first wave of ships weren't massive war cruisers, but something smaller, something unfamiliar. Their hulls glowed with strange energy, pulsing in time with the signal that had lured them in. Then the real threat appeared. From deep within the void, something enormous stirred. The faint outlines of a structure, no, a ship, became visible. It was unlike anything seen in the First War. It was larger, more intricate, as if it had been growing, adapting, preparing. And now it was awake. For the first time since leaving the shadows of Earth, the fleet faced the reality of what they had walked into. They weren't launching a surprise attack. They were the ones being hunted. The fleet barely had time to react. The enemy ships moved like phantoms, slipping through the darkness with impossible speed. Their hulls shimmered, shifting between visibility and complete obscurity. 1 second, they were there. The next, they vanished. The first blast came without warning. A violent burst of energy slammed into the side of the lead ship, sending shockwaves rippling through its structure. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and the ship lurched sideways as the impact tore through part of its hull. The bridge crew scrambled to regain control, but the enemy wasn't slowing down. More flashes erupted across the void. The fleet was under siege, shields at critical levels. A voice shouted, "They're inside our defensive range." Another called out. The commander gritted his teeth. They had trained for this. They had survived worse. But there was something different this time, something colder, more deliberate. The enemy wasn't fighting like before. They weren't overwhelming the fleet with sheer force. They were taking their time. The realization settled like ice in his veins. This wasn't an ambush. It was a hunt. One of the smaller resistance ships exploded in a silent burst of fire, its hull splitting apart before anyone could react. Another ship was already being targeted, its defenses breaking down as enemy fire cut through it like a blade. The resistance pilots fought back, weaving through the chaos, trying to outmaneuver the impossible speed of their attackers. But it wasn't working. "They're reading our movements," someone gasped. The enemy ships weren't just fast. They were learning, anticipating, adapting. Another blast struck the flagship, sending another ripple of destruction through its hull. The lights dimmed, then flared back to life as emergency power kicked in. The bridge crew braced, their hands tightening on controls, but they knew the truth. They were running out of time. "We have to push through," the commander growled. "All ships, full burn. Break the line before they close in completely." Engines roared to life. The remaining ships surged forward, forcing their way through the enemy formation. It was reckless, desperate. But it was the only chance they had. For a moment, it seemed like it might work. The enemy hesitated, adjusting, recalibrating. Then a massive structure in the distance came fully into view. It wasn't just a ship. It wasn't even a fleet. It was a construct, a living fortress. And it was waking up. The hull of the massive structure pulsed, its surface shifting like something organic. Weapons that had been dormant for who knew how long began to glow with eerie energy, their power building with every second. The first resistance ship to get too close vanished in a single blinding blast. Not destroyed. Erased. Panic surged through the fleet. The ship hadn't left debris, hadn't exploded, it had simply ceased to exist. The commander's breath caught in his throat. He had fought this enemy before. He had seen their weapons, their technology. But this was something else. Something far worse. Another ship veered off course, its pilot desperately trying to escape the range of the fortress. Too late. The same impossible energy arced out, and the ship was gone. No wreckage. No remains. Just empty space. The enemy wasn't trying to defeat them. They were wiping them from existence. The fleet had no choice. It was fight or be erased. The commander's hands clenched into fists. "We hold the line," he said, his voice low but unshaking. "We make them bleed." He turned to the crew. "Because if we go down, we're taking them with us." The ship's hull groaned under the stress, warning lights flashing red across the command deck. The remaining fleet had formed a desperate wedge, pushing forward through the endless void, but the enemy wasn't breaking. If anything, they were getting stronger, faster, more precise. The fortress in the distance loomed like an executioner, its weapons glowing with an unnatural energy that sent a deep sense of dread through the resistance forces. Another ship disappeared, no explosion, no wreckage, just gone. The bridge fell into a tense silence. They had seen destruction before, but this was something else. It felt wrong, like reality itself was being rewritten, piece by piece. Then the second twist came. A flicker on the sensors. A signal, weak but unmistakable. It was coming from inside the enemy's fortress. The commander's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." The signal pulsed again, steady this time. A distress beacon, but not one of theirs. One of the officers checked the readings twice, shaking their head in disbelief. "That's human," they whispered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the realization hit all at once. There were humans aboard the enemy structure. Survivors. Or worse, prisoners. The fleet was already on the verge of collapse, their defenses barely holding. But now, the situation had changed. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. There were people inside that thing, people who had been left behind, assumed dead. The commander's grip tightened on the controls. "Patch me through," he ordered. A burst of static filled the bridge before a voice finally cut through, weak but urgent. "Do not engage." The transmission broke apart, garbled noise taking over. Then a single word came through, sharp and unmistakable. "Trap." The signal cut out. A cold weight settled over the crew. The enemy wasn't just trying to erase them. They were luring them in. The fortress's weapons flared to life again, another streak of energy ripping through space. But this time, something changed. The battlefield itself flickered, almost as if reality were shifting. The ships weren't just being erased. They were being taken. The resistance forces had been fighting to escape, but they had never considered the possibility that the enemy didn't want them dead. They wanted them alive. And whatever was waiting inside that fortress was worse than anything they had imagined. The commander didn't hesitate. "Lock onto that signal. We're going in." The fleet had been fighting to escape, but now they had no choice. The distress signal changed everything. If humans were inside that fortress, they needed to know why. More importantly, they needed to know how. How had survivors lasted this long? And what did the enemy want with them? The ships surged forward, weaving through enemy fire. The fortress's defenses intensified, as if the enemy had been waiting for this moment. Energy beams cut through the void, missing by inches. 2 more resistance ships vanished erased from existence, just like the others. But the lead vessel pressed on, closing the distance. Then the fortress opened. Not with weapons, not with shields, but with a massive, gaping entrance, like a maw inviting them inside. The commander's breath hitched. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was an invitation. A trap. But there was no turning back. The ship pushed through, crossing the threshold into absolute darkness. The void swallowed them whole. Sensors flickered, momentarily blind. Then, without warning, everything shifted. The crew gasped. They weren't in space anymore. The ship was floating in atmosphere, as if they had suddenly been transported to a planet's surface. A massive city stretched below them, but it was wrong. Towers loomed at unnatural angles. Structures twisted in ways that defied logic. And worst of all, there were humans down there. Thousands. Alive. And standing beside them, the enemy. The crew stood frozen, staring at the impossible sight. The invaders hadn't just captured humans. They had integrated them. A voice came through the comms, clear and deliberate. Not a distress call. Not a warning. A greeting. We've been waiting for you. And then, everything went white. The crew stared at the surreal city below, at the thousands of humans standing alongside the enemy. None of it made sense. They had spent years fighting, believing they were the last of humanity. And yet, here they were alive, unharmed, and welcoming them. The commander's hands clenched into fists. "Open a secure channel," they ordered. The voice on the comms returned almost instantly. "That won't be necessary. We can hear you." Static crackled through the speakers, but the voice remained clear. It was calm. Too calm. It didn't sound desperate. It didn't sound human. The ship's AI struggled to scan the environment. "We're detecting life signs consistent with human physiology," but the AI hesitated. "There are anomalies. Genetic markers altered beyond recognition. Some are hybridized with unknown elements." The word sent a chill through the room. Hybridized. Modified. Changed. The commander's voice hardened. "Who are you?" The answer came with eerie patience. "We were once like you. But we have evolved." A figure emerged on the city's tallest spire, stepping forward onto a platform that overlooked everything. The ship's cameras zoomed in, revealing a person, a human. Or at least something that looked human. Their skin had an unnatural smoothness, their eyes dark with flecks of shifting color, as if something inside was watching back. "This war was never meant to end in extinction," the figure continued. "It was meant to bring unity." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was something else entirely. The commander took a breath. "If you're human, then tell me what happened here. How did you survive?" The figure on the platform tilted their head. "We surrendered." The words hit like a physical blow. "Surrender? After everything?" The commander shook their head. "No. That's impossible. The invaders don't take prisoners. They eradicate us." "They eradicated the old us," the figure corrected. "But survival isn't just about resistance. It's about adaptation. We became something more. And so can you." The air grew heavier with unspoken tension. The commander knew what this was. Not a war. Not a battle. An infection. The people below weren't prisoners. They weren't hostages. They were converted. The AI broke through some of the interference, displaying rapid analysis on the screens. Confirmed genetic alterations. Neural patterns enhanced, but forcibly rewritten. High probability of external influence. "Commander, they aren't lying." The realization settled like a weight in their gut. The enemy hadn't wiped them out. They had assimilated them. The crew watched in horror as more figures emerged from the city, their movements too synchronized, too precise. Their faces held traces of humanity, but something was missing. Their expressions were too calm. Their eyes held no fear, no doubt, only purpose. A chill ran through the commander's spine. "They're controlled." The figure on the platform spread their arms. "We are free." The crew braced as the ship's alarms flared to life. The city's towers pulsed with energy. A gravitational field was forming around them, pulling them closer. "It's a boarding maneuver," one of the officers warned. "They're drawing us in." The commander's mind raced. Escape wasn't an option, not yet. If they fled now, they'd never know the full truth. But if they stayed too long, the figure's voice softened. "You don't have to fight anymore. The war can end today. All you have to do is let go." The ship's gravity wavered as the pull grew stronger. Systems flickered, fighting against an unseen force. The AI was already detecting intrusions, data being pulled and rewritten in real time. This wasn't just a trap. It was conversion. The commander made their decision. Full power to thrusters break free. Now, the engines roared to life, struggling against the grip of the city's energy field. The ship trembled under the strain. Below, the figures in the city watched in silence, unfazed. The figure on the platform tilted their head again, like a parent watching a stubborn child. "You still don't understand," they said. "You can't escape." The gravitational force intensified. The AI's voice cut in, urgent. Hull integrity dropping. Their influence is overriding core systems. It was happening too fast. The ship wasn't just being pulled down, it was being rewritten. They were being rewritten. The commander turned to the weapons officer. "Fire everything we have." Missiles, energy beams, and kinetic rounds tore through the air, striking the city below. Explosions rippled across the structures, sending debris flying. But something was wrong. There was no damage. The city absorbed the attack. The energy dissipated like ripples in water, consumed by the very thing they were trying to destroy. "They're adapting to our weaponry," the AI warned. The commander clenched their jaw. This wasn't just an enemy. This was a force that learned, that evolved, and they were running out of options. The figure on the platform lowered their arms. "You can't fight the inevitable." The ship's thrusters pushed harder, engines burning at full capacity. For a moment, they wavered in the gravitational hold, caught between two forces. Then, a crack. A surge of energy rippled through the ship's core, overloading their systems. The lights flickered, and in that moment, the commander saw something in the reflection of the glass. Their own face. And behind them, a figure standing in the darkness. They spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the hum of the dying ship, the whisper of static in the air. No, not static. Whispers. Their own thoughts, no longer their own. The AI's voice turned sharp. "Commander, we need to leave now." The gravitational pull weakened for just a second, an anomaly, a glitch. A chance. The commander seized it. "Activate emergency warp immediately." The ship's core ignited in a final, desperate surge. The gravitational hold snapped as they tore free, the engines screaming as they pushed into the void. The city below pulsed, the figures watching in eerie silence. Then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, they were gone. The ship hurtled through space, systems failing one by one. The crew sat in stunned silence, breathing heavily, minds still reeling. They had escaped, but something lingered. The commander exhaled slowly, staring at the dark expanse ahead. "Status report." The AI hesitated. "We have sustained damage, but we are operational." Another pause. "However," the commander tensed. "However what?" The AI's voice was quiet. "They touched us." The whisper in the back of their minds stirred again. A presence, faint but growing. The war wasn't over. It had just changed. And deep down, the commander knew. They hadn't escaped at all.